want to welcome everyone tuning in for part 5 of Unlocking Mystery Babylon with Walid and Ted Shoebat. And just to bring us up to pace, last week we talked about the coming destruction of Israel. We talked about heavenly Israel, earthly Israel, and pray you were blessed from that conversation and that you were enlightened, your eyes were opened to a much debated prophecy. So today, a lot has ensued in America. Since last we talked, the murder of George Floyd had not taken place. So today we want to really take time and talk about racism, where in this Mystery Babylon, how the roots of racism are rooted there. And it's spoken of in the Bible. And we want to pull in the Shoebats today and ask them the questions. If we see all of these things erupting, Walid, you have written about this extensively, about the coming calamity in cities and why we need to get out of cities. You've written about this. You're going to bring us up to speed on that with your writings that you talked about over a year ago. But Ted, why don't you start us off? Bring us up to par. What are you seeing through the murder of George Floyd? What are you seeing with the riots erupting, laws being changed and passed? What is really a pressing issue right now for you?
Well, a very pressing issue for me right now are these riots, because for the most part, the protesters, they are assembling peacefully, but at the same time, you have these rioters. And the state of Minnesota has said that a lot of these rioters are coming in from out of state, and they are, in fact, agents of provocation. They're provocateurs, and they are highly organized. And in fact, the state of Minnesota has made it quite clear that it's a mixture of different groups. And the FBI has also talked about this, that it's actually a mixture of different groups, a mixture between far left anarchists and far right nationalists, and really fanatics, far right fanatics, who are using the situation as a way to do two different things. They're trying to, for one, they want to project the typical racist stereotype of blacks. Look, they're violent, they're looters. Look, these people are just barbarians, animals, savages, whatever. And then you have another type of strategy that's being utilized, and that is to use the chaos as a way to foment hatred between whites and blacks in order to start a race war. In fact, there is a term that's being used online. It's called the boogaloo. And people are using it as a hashtag. A lot of alt-right, right-wing fanatics are using it as a hashtag, as a way to dog whistle their idea of provoking a race war and eventually some sort of a revolution to establish their own utopian vision. And that is, I think, the most dangerous thing about this story, is how it will be used as a way to bring misery to other people. So you have also the fact that you have a lot of property damage going on, looting, things like that. And then what that does, because anytime you have destruction that's being done by one political group, you have the rise of another political group that acts as a response and that presents itself as the solution to those, that dangerous element that's causing all the damage. So if the left is causing the damage, then you're going to have a right-wing response that uses the chaos to its advantage as a way to promote itself and also as a way to foment hatred for the other side. And so what you're seeing, I believe, is a strategy of tension. Strategy of tension is not a term that I've made up. It's actually a term that comes from Italy, strategia della tensione, which comes actually from NATO. Back during the Cold War times, especially during the 70s and 80s, there was a big strategy that was developed by intelligence agencies within NATO countries, basically to get terrorism to be done by left-wing terrorists, or to organize terrorist attacks, making it look like it was done by leftists in order to provoke right-wing nationalism and right-wing violence. So there has been for a long time, a program done by the highest echelons of governmental power and Secret Service intelligence agencies to foment nationalist sentiment, right-wing sentiment. And so we've been seeing that in Europe, and also we've been seeing that coming from the Trump administration when Donald Trump says, he wants to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization. And you have a lot of conservatives, both in the United States and in Europe, praising this idea as some sort of a great act against these evil leftists. People don't know how dangerous that sort of thing is, because for one thing, Antifa is not an organization. Who is the leader of Antifa? There is no leader. Where are the zones? Where's the hierarchy of leadership within Antifa? It's not an organization. It's a decentralized ideological group of people who kind of share the same beliefs. And within that, there are different types of leftists also. It's not an organization. So if a president can designate an ideological group as an organization because they are members of Antifa who have done property destruction and looting and violence as well, then let's take the pro-life movement. The pro-life movement isn't an organization. It's an ideological group. And let's say some pro-life guys go and put a bomb in an abortion clinic. And then some Democrat president says, well, if Donald Trump designated Antifa as a terrorist organization, well, pro-life is also a terrorist organization. People don't know how dangerous that sort of thing is. And within this whole paradigm, we are seeing a strategy of tension. Yeah. So by the president talking about, the evil leftists, now the right wing feels emboldened. And also by attacking Antifa, Antifa also feels emboldened. It's kind of like when Hillary Clinton openly attacked the alt-right. And that very, seemingly minuscule action by Hillary Clinton actually was the action that put the alt-right on the headlines of international media. It gave us the biggest marketing boost in its history. So it's actually very dangerous when you see this sort of thing taking place. It's a strategy of tension that is being utilized to foment tension between the left and the right. And that is very, very dangerous. You have the crazy leftists who are looting, but at the same time, you have the right-wing militia types who want to walk in there with their guns, play soldier, and act like a paramilitary organization. And these people have fantasies about taking the law into their own hands and establishing some sort of a utopia. So it's a very volatile type of situation. Secondly, in regards to racism in the Bible, I think this is a subject that is never really talked about. You have the very common idea that, well, the Bible was used to justify racism. And that's true, right? In the past, it was used to justify slavery.
Yes, it was. Yes.
But it doesn't really go beyond that discussion, and we really don't get into the real intricacies of how the Bible sees the human family, because humanity is a family and humanity is very diverse. So how does the Bible see this diversity, and what sort of destiny does the Bible give to the members of the human family? So that I want to get into this. So in the book of Genesis, it talks about the different types of people that come from Noah, the patriarch, and where they went, where the migrations led to. So you have three sons of Noah. You have Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Ham's progeny eventually went into Egypt. They went into the continent of Africa. They went into parts of the Middle East, specifically South Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. So if we were to pinpoint, or if we were to recognize the sons of Ham today, we would say they are the Africans. These are Southeast Asians, indigenous peoples of Central and South America. These are the modern day ancestors, or the modern day descendants of Ham. And then you have the Semites, the sons of Shem. The sons of Shem went to the Middle East. That's a no-brainer. So modern day Arabs, Jews, Syrians, Lebanese peoples, Iraqis, Assyrians, these are the sons of Shem. And then you have the Japhethites. Japhethites are Europeans, pretty much Europeans. If we were to recognize Japhethites today, they would be, of course, Europeans, but they would also be intermixed with people living in modern-day Mongolia and the Turkic peoples people of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. These would be, for the most part, Japhethites. Although there is some intermixture, but for the most part, these are Japhetic peoples. So these are the Japhetic peoples, the sons of Japheth. Now, after the flood, Noah builds a vineyard. He raises up a vineyard, and he gets drunk, and he gets very sad, and he goes into his tent, and he's naked. And Ham walks into the tent. He sees his father naked, and then he goes out and he tells his brother, look, our father is naked. And he does this in a very mocking way. And so Japheth and Shem walk into the tent, and they respectfully put a blanket over their father, and they look away because they don't want to see their father's nakedness. And when Noah wakes up and he realizes what happened, he says, cursed be Canaan. And, well, in some translations, it says, cursed be Ham. It says, you will be the slave of slaves. You will be the slaves of your brothers. And then he says something very, very, very fascinating, because we always talk about how Noah says, that the sons of Ham will be the workers, the laborers under Shem and Japheth. But then he says something about Shem, and he also says something about Japheth. And in these verses that we ignore, we can get a better context of what the Bible is trying to say about the destiny of Ham, the destiny of the Africans. So he says, Shem, you will sleep he says, Japheth, you will sleep in the tent of Shem. And he says, Japheth will be large. Japheth will be, a great size. So what he's saying essentially is that Japheth, your ancestors are going to be the people of empire. And historically, and even today, this is the reality. I mean, the greatest empires in history, Japhetic peoples, be it the British, the Dutch, the Spanish, the Roman, the greatest empires were done by Japhetic peoples. And then he talks about the tent of Shem and how Japheth will sleep in the tent of Shem. What does that mean? What does it mean by tent? It means that the tent is symbolic of the temple. So in other words, Shem, for a while, your people are going to be the religious authorities. And out of the line of Israel is going to be the true religion. You're going to be running the temple. The tent is the temple. And then he says, Japheth, eventually you're going to take over the tent of Shem. In other words, somewhere along the line, Shem is no longer going to be present in the temple. Japheth is going to take over. And this is an amazing prophecy, because what happened was, well, it's obvious. The Jews were leading the temple. They had the true religion. They had the priesthood. And then the Messiah came from their line. But what happened? The Jews, the sons of Shem, these particular sons of Shem, they rejected the Messiah. And then what happened? St. Paul, he goes to the Israelites in the book of Acts, and he says, Christ is the true Messiah. And they say, no. And there's all these acrimonious cries against St. Paul throughout the book of Acts done by the Jews. And what happens at the end of the book of Acts? St. Paul says, I will go to the Gentiles and they will hear me. I will go to Rome. So he establishes, alongside St. Peter, the Church of Rome, and the Europeans become really the carriers of the torch for the temple. And that is why the center of Christendom has always been Europe. Center of Christendom, the Vatican, where is it? It's in Italy. Why? Because the sons of Japheth took over the sons of Shem. And then you have Ham. And Noah says, your descendants will work for Shem and Japheth. And people say, well, this justifies slavery. This is where things get a little sensitive. The sons of Ham were, they were given this destiny to be workers. But at the same time, there is, in the eyes of the flesh, this is something very ugly. It's something that's very demeaning. It's something that is inferior. But Christ is the servant. So it says, Ham, you're going to serve. See, this is what's so beautiful about it, because if you look at the Bible with fleshy eyes, you fall into the pit. It's like when they asked Jesus, Christ, why do you speak in parallels, in parables? And Christ says, so that the damned don't get it. They don't, so that essentially the corrupt, the insidious people, they don't understand. He wanted people to think and to see things past the physical, to look things through the eyes of heaven, through the eyes of the Spirit. So yes, the sons of Ham are to be servants, but Christ is a servant. He's the servant of all servants. And so it's very interesting. It says in the book of Psalms, I am a priest of the order of Melchizedek. And then St. Paul says, Christ is the priest of the order of Melchizedek. Now, who was Melchizedek? Melchizedek was a Canaanite. The Canaanites were Hamites. Canaan was one of the sons of Ham.
Wow.
And so Christ doesn't come from the order of Shem. He comes from the order of a Hamite.
Now you're preaching, Ted. Let's
That's
go.
good.
Let's go. You're
You see,
preaching.
you see, I don't, this is something that I've studied for a while, and it's something that I don't see anyone talking about.
Right.
That's the thing. So yes, you look at the sons, if you look at the Hamitic countries, the African countries, the Central and South American countries where there are a lot of indigenous people, they're very poor. They do a lot of the labor for the Europeans or the Semitic peoples. And many, many times they are horrendously abused, be it, the blood diamonds in Africa, be it how we exploit migrant workers here in the United States, how we put them in cages and deprive them of human rights, how we even will put migrant workers from Central America in harsh labor and pay them like pretty much nothing. I mean, stuff that's lower than slave wages. These things are happening today. All of the horrendous forms of slavery that you will see in South America, here in the United States, you see it in Africa, you see it in Libya. After the Libyan revolution, they began to take blacks and put them in cages, send them off as slaves, murder them, rape the African women. A lot of these horrendous things were taking place in North Africa. The fact that you have cartels, and look at the people who are leading the cartels in Mexico. These people aren't indigenous. These are people of Castellano descent. Just look at El Chapo's face. And what are these big narcos doing? Well, they're selling drugs, but they're also selling other things. They're selling humans. In fact, now humans are, and this is going to sound horrendous because it is, but humans are a bigger commodity than drugs.
Yeah.
Because now you have narcos kidnapping innocent people who aren't even involved in the drugs. You know how there's a common idea that drug dealers only kill other drug dealers, or they kill people who are somehow involved in the drug trade, and they anger the cartel, and the cartel kills them. That's not really the case anymore. Cartels are killing innocent people, mainly women and children, for their organs and selling their organs in the black markets. And this is happening a lot of times to people who are of indigenous descent. It's pretty horrendous stuff. In fact, if you look at one of the biggest cartels in Mexico, or at one point one of the biggest cartels, it was called the Knights Templar. And some of their first victims were indigenous people living in Michoacan. So yes, the sons of Ham are servants. But the problem is you have horrendous abuse that takes place. And here's another thing that I want to add. If you look at you look at the story of Ham, and they say, the Hamites are made to be servants and all these things. This is very, very racist. But here's the thing. Even if you take the Bible away and put everything in a secular context, there is always going to be exploitation against the sons of Ham. That's why you have, for example, some of the biggest leaders of the illegal diamond trade in Africa, the people who are running what they call the blood diamonds. They take people, put them as slaves, they make them work to dig diamonds out, they murder people. It's pretty horrendous. Some of the people who are leading that are Jews. And these Jews don't believe in the Bible. They don't. So even if you strip away the Bible and you make everything secular, there's still going to be abuse. In fact, some of the most horrendous abuse against Hamitic peoples were done by Darwinists, people who don't even believe in God. They believe in evolution. In fact, a lot of times, if you read about the history of Australia, they were English Darwinists, people who didn't believe in the Bible, who went to Australia to kill Aboriginals, to take their skulls so that the skulls can be sent to museums. These things were done by evolutionists, by biological determinists. So there's always going to be this exploitation and this abuse of Hemites. The question is, how do we remove that abuse? What we need to do is apply the true destiny of the human family, the sons of Noah, to the world. Yes, the sons of Shem, they were made to be the religious authority. Well, they forsook that, and Japheth took over. Now Japheth is forsaking that. What's beautiful, though, is that while the Hemite was designated as the laborer, the Hemites are leading the world in Christianity. Mm-hmm. If you go to Europe and you go to churches in Europe, who do you see a lot of? You don't really see a lot of Europeans. You see a lot of Africans. You see a lot of Southeast Asians. You see a lot of people from South India.
And those are the places that the biggest revivals in the world are happening right now.
Yes. So the sons of Ham, the servants, are leading the world.
Yes.
Just as Christ, the servant, brought salvation to the whole world. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I'll give you a great example. The Methodist Church, primarily a white church organization, founded in England. The white Methodists, for the most part, support homosexual marriage. Mm-hmm. And a number of years ago, the Methodist Church was debating whether or not they should officially accept homosexuality. The biggest objectors were the black leaders in the Methodist Church. Mm-hmm. And they say if it weren't for the black leaders, the Methodist Church would be officially accepting homosexuality. The same thing for the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church, a number of Western cardinals, they wanted to impose this line into the Catholic Church that homosexuals can offer good things to the church. They wanted to put this as church teaching. Hmm. The African bishops were the biggest objectors. And if it were not for the African bishops, that line would have been inserted into Catholic teaching. And it would have given a further step towards the full normalization of homosexuality in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. So it's the sons of Ham, the so-called servants, who are leading the world against Sodom, more so than the sons of Japheth, who are supposed to be leading the tent, who are supposed to be leading the temple. And you find stories like this in the Old Testament. This is what no one ever really talks about.
Yeah, right.
For example, there is a plague in ancient Israel, and King David goes to God and says, what do I need to do to remove this plague?
Yeah.
And God says, you have to make a sacrifice. You have to make a sacrifice on the land of Ornan. Ornan was a Jebusite, meaning he was a Hemite. He was one of the sons of Canaan. And he says, you have to make a sacrifice on that man's land. And so David going to the land of a Canaanite, and the Canaanite looks at David and bows down and says, what can I do for you? And David says, I have to make a sacrifice on your land. Mm-hmm. And he says, and Ornan says, use one of my animals. And David says, well, let me pay you for the animal. He says, no, take it for free. And David sacrifices the animal on the land of a Canaanite. And by that sacrifice on the land of a Canaanite, Israel is saved. So it's on the land of a Hemite through which Israel is saved. And it is through Christ, who is a priest of the order of a Canaanite, of a Hemite, that the world is saved.
Yes.
So if you're going to read the Bible with this superficial fleshy mind, and you're going to say, oh, it says right there, this Ham is the servant. You see, they're slaves. You see, they're to be the workers. They have the lowest position. In reality, it's the opposite of what the flesh thinks.
Yes.
They have the highest position.
Yes.
Yes.
See, and that's the whole paradigm of Ham, Shem, and Japheth that no one ever talks about. There is another story, for example. Joshua is fighting the Canaanites, and he's fighting several tribes. But then there's one tribe called the Gibeonites. These are one group of Canaanite living in ancient Israel. And the Gibeonites decide to go against what the other Canaanite tribes are doing, and they go to Joshua, and they say, show mercy on us, we will do anything you want, just don't kill us. And Joshua makes an oath with them. And the other tribes of Canaan find out what the Gibeonites did, making a pact with the Israelites, and they say, let us annihilate the Gibeonites. They wanted to do genocide on the Gibeonites. And the Gibeonites go to Joshua and they beg Joshua for help. What did Joshua do? Did he say, oh, I'm going to let you guys die because you're Canaanites? No. Joshua, in fact, spoke with God, and God said to go into battle and fight those Canaanites. So Joshua readied his army and had a war with the other tribes of Canaan. And it was a war to protect Canaanites. And Joshua, the sun begins to go down, and Joshua says, well, if the sun goes down, we can't continue the battle. So Joshua says, sun, stand still, moon, stand still. And the battle continued. And if you read the book of Exodus, it says, well, it's not the book of Exodus, but if you read the story, the scripture, it says this was the greatest, the book of Joshua, it says this was the greatest battle that Israel ever fought. Yeah. So the greatest battle that Israel ever fought was in defense of Hamites.
Yeah. That is powerful.
So it's like, well, Hamites are to be the servants, but here we have Semites serving Hamites.
Yes.
And there's other examples I can give. For example, King Saul begins to do a genocide on the Gibeonites. This is way later in the time of David. Saul begins, and it says in the scripture, in his zeal for Israel, he begins to slaughter the Gibeonites. In other words, in his racism, he begins to kill the Gibeonites. And then God puts a curse on Israel, and there's a famine. And David says, what do I do? I think it was David or King Solomon, but he says, what do I do to get rid of this plague? And God tells the king of Israel, it is the house of Saul and his bloody viciousness that he, in his slaughter of the Gibeonites.
Yes.
And so the Gibeonites are allowed to kill a number of the sons of Saul, and there's redemption.
Yes.
So there's, people like to take the Bible as it's this right-wing book. Yeah. In reality, the Bible is anti-fascist and anti-racist. I can go on and on about this subject, but...
No, this is good. If you have articles on this, please send them.
Oh, yeah. I did a number of articles on this subject.
Wonderful, Ted. It's divine revelation. This needs to be talked about. This is history that goes untouched and unnoticed.
Yeah,
so thank you for bringing this out.
Yes, I think that was beautifully done, Ted, and that was powerful in revelation for people. And as you can constantly say, history rhymes, and we can see why now that the Hamites have been persecuted from time immemorial.
Oh, yeah.
Because of Christ coming through their line, and you've articulated it so well, and that was revelation.
I appreciate that, yeah.
Walid, if you want to come in and expand what you talked about a year ago, and how we're seeing the cities on fire because of racism, and if you want to go ahead and take it in to show us how Mystery Babylon is playing on into this.
Yeah, we did write several Sunday specials last year warning that, the cities will have turmoil. We always ask why. You look at the plague of COVID-19, it's in major cities. Not much of farmlands, but major cities. We look at the riots. It's in major cities, in cities all over. We look at any riots, any problems these days, this comes from major cities. We keep forgetting that God's intent for his people was not really the city life. I mean, you go back even to Nimrod. Let us build us a city,
Yes.
And then God said, let us go down and confuse their tongue.
Yes.
That is not a small story. So the idea of city or metropolitanism was not the ideal that God had ordained for mankind.
Yes.
And so we see, God destroying all cities. in the end times. He destroys all the cities, and he gives you several areas in the Bible where really Mystery Babylon constitutes these major cities. Even in Israel itself, I don't know if I shared that one last time we spoke, in Jeremiah 51, verses 5 and 6. For Israel has not been forsaken. We read that and we say, oh, okay, well, God's not going to forsake Israel, but continue the text. Nor for Judah of his God. God made a deal with Abraham. Okay, he's never going to destroy Israel completely. Though their land was filled with sin. What's that about?
Yes.
You know, so we see in metropolitanism, homosexuality, all kinds of things against the Holy One of Israel. Look what it says the verse after in Jeremiah 51, 5 to 6. Flee out of the midst of Babylon. Hello. Let's construct these two verses together. Though their land was filled with sin. So where is it supposed to flee from? The sinful land, right?
Mm-hmm.
Flee out of the midst of Babylon. There he is reflecting that that land called Israel today is part of this Babylon. It's not immune from being Mystery Babylon. It's part of it. So he equally destroys many, is Japheth, Shem, you name him. He doesn't care. He's no respecter of persons. And so we can't avoid the term their land in this case, speaking of a literal physical land. So now we understand Jeremiah 49 to 51, Isaiah 21, the destruction of Israel and Arabia together really constitutes part of this mega destruction of Mystery Babylon. And then for Israel has not been forsaken, nor Judah of their God, and we believe all is well, but it's not all well because he's telling you something else is going to happen. So the remnant who are not forsaken. It's the remnant who are not forsaken. What are the remnants? Who flee out of the midst of Babylon. So he's saying, in John, in Revelation, he says, come out of her, my people, lest you suffer in her plagues. The woman that you see is the great city, So it's not, it's literally talking about a city, a mother city and daughter cities. And so it's an entire relationship of these cities, states together. And then, God destroys Israel's chariots. In Micah 5, we discussed that last time. He destroys the chariots, cut off the cities of your land. It's a major destruction of cities, And look what it says. It's in Isaiah 14. People, when people talk about Mystery Babylon, they don't relate to one of the most important chapters in the Bible about Mystery Babylon. And that is Isaiah 14, speaks of Babylon.
Yes.
Isaiah 14 is talking about Babylon. And then what does it say? Prepare slaughter for his children because of the iniquity of their fathers, lest they rise up and possess the land and fill the face of the world with cities.
Yes.
So where's the commandment about not building cities? I mean, when it comes teaching in the church, we think metropolitanism is okay or city life is okay. God never intended city life. And then we come to Isaiah 24, okay? It talks about the land being entirely empty, utterly plundered. For the Lord has spoken his word. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. The earth also defiled under its inhabitants because they transgressed the laws.
Mm-hmm.
We transgress the orders and the laws of God, the moral code that God has instituted. They transgressed. Where is this transgression going on? Is it primarily going on in Africa? No, it's primarily going on in the northern hemisphere. And Isaiah 14 speaks about the north, that this Antichrist comes from the north. The spirit of Antichrist is building cities. The spirit of Antichrist, or the spirit of this evil entity, wants to kind of probe the cosmos. You know, I will rise to heaven. You know, we're going to go to the moon. We're going to make shuttles. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. This kind of, you know, idea that the greatness of mankind is him probing the hemisphere instead of really, you know, treating his fellow man in a better way, or making more farmlands, or teaching mankind how to eat, how to survive. You know, there's a lot of things that the Bible tells us. Look what it says, continuing here. For you have made a city a ruin, a fortified city a ruin, a palace of foreigners to be a city no more. It will never be rebuilt. And then he will destroy on this mountain the surface of the covering cast over all people, and the veil that spread over all nations. All this deception that's going on, God will basically destroy it in the end. This fortified city, which will never be rebuilt, is an empire of cities of evil ideology.
Yes.
And then, you know, pretty much we see this. John says, come out of her, my people, as I mentioned, lest you suffer in her plagues. We see COVID-19. We see looting. We see all these are plagues. Plagues is not just a disease. Plagues is also destruction. The plagues of Egypt wasn't just a disease. The plagues of Egypt was frogs, was mosquitoes, was all hail, was all sorts of things. We see Jeremiah 50, Isaiah 45, Zechariah 14:5. All prophecies are an end-time context that is speaking about a mystery Babylon, that is speaking about plagues, that is speaking about coming out. Then we have a major second Exodus, which really should take the crux of this discussion. There is a second Exodus. People don't understand when they read the Bible about the second Exodus. They can't seem to imply the second Exodus to the Jewish people because they come out of lands where there's no Jews.
Yeah.
Then we see the Exodus came out of where? Out of Egypt. Yes. So when we look at the Old Testament, we must understand that ancient Egypt, there is a short term and a long term of a global Egypt. Yes. Ancient Sodom, there's a short term, but there's a global long term of this Sodom and Gomorrah and Egypt. And we see that in Isaiah 19 in the prophecy about this magnificent Egypt, that the Lord rides in a swift cloud. He comes out of this entity called Egypt. And then we see that there's a prophecy that says in this Egypt, what's going to happen? The brother will fight against brother, neighbor against neighbor. What are we about to see? We haven't seen neighbor fighting against neighbor in the United States as a result of this episode that we've seen.
Yes.
But should we see that, you know, we're pitting one group over the other. We're pitting the white over the black. We're pitting the, you know, Antifa and right wing and this kind of stuff. That's what's going to happen. We're not there yet, but we see on the horizon very, very easily how this could happen. Yes. Neighbor against neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. If this was speaking of ancient Egypt, Egypt is but one kingdom. This is speaking of kingdom against kingdom, a much more magnificent Egypt than ancient Egypt. Mm-hmm. And we see in Ezekiel 32, he says about this figurative Pharaoh, because we always think Antichrist, but it's not just Antichrist. We have a lot of figurative language in the Bible about this entity coming in the end. Yes. It's called Egypt. It's called Sodom. It's called Pharaoh. You know, speaks of this Pharaoh, this figure, what the Bible calls Pharaoh of Egypt. But it's very interesting when we look at the text very closely. Look what it says. I bring your destruction among the nations, in Ezekiel 32, among the nations, into the countries which you have not known. How could this be ancient Egypt? In other words, this Pharaoh will be destroyed outside of Egypt, ancient Egypt. Egypt hasn't known these nations. Now that these nations have ever heard of Egypt. Yes. Yet this figurative Pharaoh is destroyed in nations that never knew Egypt. Mm-hmm. So it's the opposite of really the literal Egypt here. And this is nation against nation, all of it called Egypt. So this Egypt are many nations. We can deduce that because it says nation will rise against nation. Even Matthew 24 talks about Christ himself said nation will rise against nation.
Yes.
Okay. And then it accuses the Pharaoh. It tells him, the king of Egypt, you're like a lion amongst the nations, and you are like a monster in the seas, bursting forth in your rivers, troubling the waters with your feet, and fouling their rivers. People read this stuff and just kind of look at this flowery language and they just kind of skip it and don't analyze it really carefully. Revelation 16:9 sums up the whole escapade. This is a parted city that constitutes and represents the cities of the nations. Because in Revelation it says this Jerusalem was split in three, and then the cities of the nations fell. All the cities of the nations fell. This constitutes Mystery Babylon. It's pretty direct there. But very few interpreters kind of look at these and deduce that it's speaking of cities. Yes. So Jerusalem must be included, this Sodom and Egypt, as John referred to it. And it must be also the hemisphere of the north in Isaiah 14. He wants to rule the mountains of the north, the regions of the north. Now, we're not sure exactly where this northern hemisphere ends. Is it the Turkic nations? Is it Gog and Magog in the north quarters? Well, obviously, it has to be included because in Ezekiel 38, it talks about the north, and also Joel talks about the north. Okay? And so how is Egypt being described as this young lion? It calls Egypt as the young lion. It's a young nation. It's a young entity. This could be the US involved, Europe involved. We don't know 100%. But it's the lion amongst the nations. It's the most powerful country among the nations. And why does the scripture identify two lions? You know, in other parts of the Bible, it describes Assyria as a lion, and it describes King of Babylon as a lion. There's two different lions here. So this Egypt is this grand beast, according to Ezekiel 32. Is the monster in the seas. The seas, the woman that you see sitting on the seas and the waters are multitudes, nations, tribes, and tongues. And then it talks about in the woman fled to the wilderness. You see, how does the woman, the church, flees into the wilderness? The wilderness isn't the city.
Right.
It doesn't say run to the city for cover. It says get out of the city. Even Christ says get out of Jerusalem when you see the abomination of desolation. You know, and there's not one beast. There's two beasts in this case. We can take a look at these two beasts in Revelation. And there's many different facets to look at it. It's very interesting. I written essays on the different facets of just that one verse. And I saw a beast, the first beast coming out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And they have names of blasphemy. Could this be the Muslim world? You know, blaspheming Christ, denying the sonship of Christ, denying the Father, denying the Trinity. But then he says, I saw another beast coming out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb. Once you see like a lamb, that is definitely gives us an idea. Like a lamb means it looks real. It looks like the truth, but speaks like a dragon. It's very deceptive. So we are against an entity here. The major entity here is what Theodore is talking about. It's not the Antifas of the world or the atheists of the world or the tree huggers of the world here. Yes. But it is an entity that claims to be conservative, Christian, carries the symbol of Christian, having the form of godliness, denying the powers therein. And so we look at even back to Isaiah 14. Do not rejoice, all you Philistia, because the rod, the Assyrian that struck you is broken. Philistia is the Philistines. Philistines are not just Palestinians as you think. Philistines were seafarers from all over the Mediterranean. He calls them Philistia. Okay? For out of the serpent's root will come forth a viper, another one, and his offspring will be a fiery flying serpent. The firstborn of the poor will feed, and the needy will lie down safely. I will kill your roots of famine, and so on and so forth. all you Philistia are dissolved, for smoke will come from the north. There's this whole concept of the north again in Isaiah 14, very much. You can't divorce Ezekiel 38 from Isaiah 14, from Micah 5, from Zechariah. They all have to fit like a big major puzzle together. And the problem today is people take a piece of the puzzle and they begin to analyze everything based on that little piece of the puzzle without constructing the whole picture. Yeah. And by the time we construct the whole picture, we understand what the spirit of the Antichrist is. I will sit on the lofty mount, on the most prestigious nation in the world.
Yes.
Okay. On mount is a nation, is an entity, is a kingdom, is a power peg. You have to understand that. Mountains, 7 kings. Kings rule kingdoms.
Yes.
You know, a mountain is a power peg. Towards the north, I will go up above the clouds. I will be like the Most High. I can figure things out as if I am God, because science is going to lead us. Science will make us, we can do all kinds of things with genetics. We can do this and we can crossbreed that, and all this pride-filled eugenist ideologies, all that comes from the West.
Yes.
It doesn't come out of Africa. And then, you know, we can go on, and one shall come forth through the hands of the Kittians. Here comes the Kittians, and the Kittim is really the northern regions. That's really the progeny of Japheth in the end that is destroyed. It's the most powerful. It comes and defeats Assyria, but God says, I will destroy those as well, alongside with Eber. And so we see the full picture as we spoke of last year. And then we come to see the multitudes of conversions, the multitudes of God's people coming as a remnant from Syria. Ezekiel 7, no, it's Isaiah 17, I believe. And then the Sabians in Isaiah 45. Next week, let's discuss the conversions and discuss Isaiah 45 and the different facets of Isaiah 45. Why Isaiah 45 cannot really be speaking of the historic Cyrus and the exodus out of this Egypt, that Christians basically, God will give them refuge in the wilderness.
Yes.
Out of this greater Egypt, and God smites the 7 seas of Egypt, the 7 tongues of Egypt. We don't have 7 tongues in Egypt today. And so there's a much bigger picture, and clearly these prophecies will say, you know, and see these prophecies, you know, this, it says that they carry the banner. The Gentiles will carry that banner. It's not, this is not speaking of the literal Israel here. And so the confusion and the embarrassments of how, if I face these interpreters really in a debate of trying to understand these verses, which they can never fathom, they can't seem to understand.
Right.
You know, there's another Exodus. Well, Israel is back in the land. What other Exodus? This is speaking of a greater Exodus. An Exodus out of the paganized Egypt. And we have Isaiah 11, where even the Assyrian will go and say to this nations, you know, the kingdoms of the idols going into paganism. So next week, let's talk about paganism and, you know, the different facets and where the Bible addresses how the world or Christendom plunges into paganism. That's Katene, by the way.
Yes.
And how God will destroy that and just bring the Africans. He will save so many people. It's always been the case. When people fail God, God replaces them with something else. In other words, don't think that the corporation of God, you know, cannot survive without your employment. You know, God can always fire you and find somebody else.
Yeah. Well said.
Very good.
Yes, this was a great episode. Ted, the revelation and the clarity that you brought out about the sons of Ham, that was beautifully done.
Thank you.
And as I was pondering on what you were saying and what Walid was bringing out about what we're going to see about Mystery of Babylon and the conversions of the days ahead, how you've brought the issue out continually throughout the years about immigration and the forced immigration from all these nations that we've talked about, mostly from the Hamites. And I think that might be part of the judgment that Mystery of Babylon is going to see because of these migrations. If we don't treat our brothers as we would treat ourselves, we're going to have some things to answer for in the days ahead.
Yes.
And as a closing thought to wrap this up, what do you see more as far as the coming revival that we see in South America and Africa right now? What do you see on the horizon concerning that, what we're talking about, Mystery Babylon, with the persecution that's going on?
Revivals don't come at the time of prosperity. That's foolishness to think that here we are prosperous and then we're going to have revivals.
Yeah.
Sin comes out of prosperity.
Yes.
It's desperation is what brings revival.
Yes.
So it's very clear in the prophecies in the scripture that such revival happens as a result of necessity. You know, even today, you take a look at, say, there's less women wanting to get married. There's, marriages getting less and less. In fact, in COVID-19, there's more divorces. And so the Bible tells us after this destruction, how a woman will come to one man. He said, give me, I will work myself. I just want to carry your name or something like that. They want to get married. Mm-hmm. And so God basically reversed that metropolitan order in the end. So you look at Isaiah 45, the recognition comes after the battle, after the major onslaught. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to see revivals. In fact, we haven't seen any revivals. In fact, what you think is revivals in America is not really revivals. I dispute that notion that what we see is revivals. Mm-hmm. What we see is falling away. What we're going to see more is falling away. Mm-hmm. The falling away must come, and the man of sin is revealed. Okay, then comes all, the repentance, and they come to Cyrus in Manacles. Read that, they come in Manacles and Shackles, saying, we know that God is with you. We know that you are God.
Yes.
It's very interesting, how is Cyrus called God? That's not the Cyrus of the ancient Cyrus.
Right.
That's Christ. Cyrus, Chorus, means son.
Yes.
And Christ is called the Son, S-U-N. And, even the Psalms called God the Son. And so that's when the repentance happens. Mm-hmm. All will see him, will basically glorify him and repent.
Yes.
Well done. Thank you both for your time this evening. And we look forward to next week unpacking part 6 of Unlocking Mystery Babylon. We wish you guys have a great evening. Thank you for being on with us today.
You bet.